Punctuation shows relationships between words and sentences. This is lesson 14 in the architecture of grammar. My name is Léandre Larouche. I'm the author of the architecture of grammar and the founder of Trivium Writing. So now we're going to cover punctuation, but before we do so, before we look into all the different punctuation marks and what their function is, we need to talk a little bit about what punctuation is, why it's important, and how it works. So in a nutshell, punctuation shows relationships between sentences and words. So what does that mean? Well, we have sentences, and these sentences, as we've been talking about in the past videos, are made of different components. They're made of different levels. So they're made of clauses. They are made of phrases. They are made of word rolls. And they are also made of parts of speech. So these are the different levels to sentences. Now, between sentences themselves, we need to have punctuation, because otherwise, how do we know that there's sentence number 1 and then there's sentence number 2? How do we know that there are different sentences? Well, they use a certain punctuation mark, and as we're going to see, that punctuation mark is a period, or it could also be an exclamation mark or a question mark. So these are the punctuation marks that show that a sentence ends. But we also have to look at inside sentences. So how do we decode which are the parts of a sentence and what do these parts do in a sentence? If we want to truly understand a sentence, we have to understand punctuation. We've talked about the different clauses. We have dependent and independent. Punctuation helps us determine which is the dependent and which is the independent. When it comes to phrases, phrases are often set off with commas. So that's a punctuation mark. So commas help us differentiate phrases and layer the information in those sentences. Now, word rolls, parts of speech, sometimes we have lists in a sentence. So again, we need all kinds of different punctuation marks, whether it be a comma, whether it be a semicolon, whether it be a hyphen. Some words have to be connected together with a hyphen. So punctuation shows us the relationship between words and between sentences, and without punctuation we cannot understand each other in the written form, because punctuation is the code that helps us make sense of the words that are written. Because if we just had words, we wouldn't have sentences without punctuation. We wouldn't know what's a sentence, what's not. So words without punctuation don't make sense. And you could take a paragraph, remove all the punctuation, and perhaps you would understand because you're already aware of punctuation. However, if you didn't know punctuation, or if you are missing notions when it comes to punctuation, you would not understand a single word of what is being said in that paragraph. So again, to reiterate, punctuation shows relationships between words and sentences. Now go in lesson 14 in the architecture of grammar, and you can read the entire chapter, and then we're going to move on to the punctuation marks one by one. One thing that's important to note about punctuation before we go into all the different punctuation marks is capital letters. Capital letters. I take some time to talk about capital letters because it's a mistake that I often see people make. These are capital letters. These are lowercase. So capital, lowercase. So this is capitals. And so, for example, we could have everything in capitals. So that's all caps. And the mistake that I often see people make is they use capital letters when they should not be. So in the English language, we only use capital letters at the beginning of a sentence. So oftentimes the beginning of the sentence would be the who, which then leads into the what. Or if we're talking about the title or something, or we're talking about a proper noun would be a country, it would be a proper name. So there are some exceptions to the capital letters, but it's important to know that most of the time in sentences you're not putting capital letters on, especially on nouns. I'm not exactly sure why people make this mistake so much. However, what I can tell you is that there was a time in history when English used capital letters on all nouns. I believe it may be incorrect, but they would use it a lot more, especially if you read Middle English or Old English. You'll see a lot more capital letters like this. And the other thing is the German language actually puts capital letters on every single noun, but that's not the case in modern English. We don't do that. And so, for example, let me give you a sentence. If I wrote, I like money, fame, and status, this is correct. So there are no capitals. However, if I did put the capital, it would look a little bizarre. It would look pompous. It would look I would be putting emphasis on these words. And a lot of the time people put capital letters on important concepts. Most of the time that is not necessary. It's just not. And so, especially in neutral context, you should not be using capital letters unless it's at the beginning of the sentence, or unless it's a proper noun, or unless it is a title. For example, if I say, I read the architecture of grammar. So I have the capitals because it is a title. On the computer, this would be in italics. If I wrote this by hand, I would underline because I can't do italics doing handwriting. So this is appropriate because it's a title.